Hello, welcome everyone. Today I have a new guest to the show, and hopefully not the last. Kev Harrison. Kev, do you mind giving yourself a short synopsis or a short synopsis, an introduction?
Hi, Jason. First of all, thanks so much for having me on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Um, yeah, my name's Kev Harrison. I'm a writer of like horror and dark fiction from the UK, but I live in Portugal these days because it just rained a bit too much. Yeah, I'm here really just to talk to you about all of that, and also my debut novel, which came out about 6 weeks ago, which is called Shadow of the Hidden.
I'm glad actually that you mentioned that it rained too much because I was listening to an interview with you and you mentioned that you have SAD. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. Like seasonal affective disorder. Yeah, it's
Yes.
there was one time actually when I was at university and I was talking to someone about this today, bizarrely. And I went to university in the Midlands of England, which is like sort of it was a city, well, a very small city between Manchester and Birmingham, so in the northwest Midlands of the country. And we
Hmm.
actually set a new record for consecutive days of rain. It was something like 254 days
Wow.
without stopping. And me and my friends drank a lot during that year.
Yeah, I understand. There's a reason why I ask is because I have depression, and on my channel I like to talk about mental health awareness
Oh,
because
sure.
I think we need to break the stigma. People are
Yeah.
afraid to talk about it when they're struggling, and so when I heard you talk about that, I was like, I got to ask about that.
Yeah, for sure.
How does SAD affect you when you get it?
It's just a general sense of lowness. It's that kind of all-consuming, like, lack of energy, lack of positivity. And I find as well when you kind of wake up and from the get-go on that day, you are kind of down, it can
Hmm.
be really difficult to pick yourself out of that. And when, growing up in the UK, I mean, I lived there for the first like 31 years of my life, like so much of every year is really not just the rain but also just grey, just cold, just unpleasant.
Yeah,
And so you end up with almost all your time indoors, almost all the time with artificial lights, which is really depressing.
yeah,
So it can really hit you very hard. I know some of my other friends who still live there really struggle with that as well.
yeah. Um, when winter hits here, we usually get a lot of snow.
What
Um,
part of the US are you in?
I'm in actually in Canada. I'm
Canada.
in
Sorry, my
Yeah.
God.
Oh, that's fine. I'm in Ontario, Canada, and I live like right in the middle of all the Great Lakes.
Okay.
And so we tend to get hit hard in winter. This year though, we
Yeah.
didn't get hit hard. It was a pretty light winter, but we went through a good 2-month period where there was no sunlight
Oh
whatsoever.
my God, it's just so difficult to deal with, isn't it?
It is, yeah. All I wanted to do was sleep
Yeah.
and eat. It's like you just want to eat and then go to sleep and then
Yeah,
repeat.
completely. Yeah. And I find like if you wake up and the sun's shining and the sky's blue, this sounds really weird for a horror writer, but if I look out in the morning first thing and the sun is shining, it just gives me a completely different disposition for the day.
Oh,
Like no matter what
absolutely,
I've got
yeah.
on the agenda.
Yeah, it's been kind of a mixed bag now because it's spring, and so you get a lot of
Mm,
rain, but
yeah.
we've had some really nice days, and let me tell you, I like to soak that up.
Yeah, betcha.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know one thing that we have in common, and one
Mm,
thing that can help with, the winter blues
go
is
on.
heavy metal.
Absolutely. That can help with anything, I find.
Yeah, I find that like, the right song
Mm.
can just pump you full of energy. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sort of started my love affair with heavy metal when I was like in my early teens, I suppose. Like I kind of listened to, Metallica and a lot of rock music, like sort of Guns N' Roses, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then a friend of mine, my best friend in high school, basically like one day put like a Sepultura tape, cassette tape, this is how
Mhm.
old I am, into my jacket pocket when I was going home for an Easter holiday or something. It was the Chaos AD album.
Okay, yeah.
And I, at that time, I hadn't really learned to get on with screaming or growling vocals. And but I played it a couple times, and I started to think like, yeah, there's something here that I really like. And by the end of that holiday, I was just like a changed man.
That's the one with roots on it, right?
It's the one before that actually. It's one with like
Okay.
it's got Refuse, Resist, and Territory.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's still Max Cavaleras doing his growling, which I
Yeah, oh,
very
yeah.
much appreciated. Yeah, brilliant.
I loved their older stuff,
Yeah.
but I enjoyed, like, the root that actually, I think the song with Roots on it, it's the same name as the album, right?
That's
It's
it.
like Root.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
exactly. And they went
It's
more
been a
into like
while,
the
yeah.
kind of like tribal drumming and stuff because obviously they've got some like I think the drummer, well the drummer and the singer of that at that time they have some like indigenous Brazilian sort of blood or something, and so they
Yeah.
were like using a lot of like sort of indigenous instrumentation in the drumming and stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was what was really cool about that song, and they also kinda mixed it with sorta like a Korn vibe, you know, like,
Proper
with
like sort
just
of
that barrel,
dirty
barrel, barrel,
thrash
barrel,
metal.
barrel,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Exactly.
Oh, I don't know, I think maybe we like different genres, like, just from what I've heard you talking about, but we probably have, like, a lot of commonalities too. I tend to go towards, like, psychedelic doom and sludge and some thrash and death metal, also some black, but I need the more listener-friendly kind of black metal. I
Okay.
was I
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
wondering, what's your favorite, subgenres and maybe favorite bands these days?
I mean, these days I listen to an awful lot of like progressive metal as well.
Okay,
So
yeah.
and stuff that kind of mixes up like electronic bits and pieces. So like I don't know if you know the band Leprous.
I
Like
don't think so, no.
they had this album that came out last year called Aphelion,
Okay.
which like completely blew my mind away. That was amazing. It's like kind of if you imagine like sort of well, just like really heavy metal, but with like a falsetto singer, and then
Mhm.
with like some sort of like synth pop kind of woven into it. It's absolutely bonkers, but I love it, and they're amazing live.
I wrote them
Um,
I wrote them down, so I'm gonna check that
yeah,
out because I do
yeah,
like
check them out.
progressive too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just like stuff where there's a lot of things going on because I was in a band for a long time,
Yeah.
and the guitarist in the band's like is just a phenomenal musician. So like I kind of got trained to really appreciate when there's a lot of interesting stuff and intricate stuff going on in the music as well.
Is anyone in that band still going? Are they, like, touring or making albums?
Well, actually, the guy who played guitar in my first band, it was a band called Desolation. He's actually got like a project that he's doing now, which is like progressive metal called Kald, which is like Kald. Yeah, it's like with his brother and someone else. It's only a studio project at the moment, but it's really cool stuff. It's like sort of yeah, heavy metal with like a lot of interesting sort of intricate stuff going on. So yeah, I recommend people to
Very
check that
cool.
out. Yeah,
I'll definitely check that out too.
cool man.
Um, my previous interview, just, the other week there, was with Michael David Wilson.
I know, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I, uh, I knew that you, worked on This Is Horror. You
Yeah.
wrote some articles for them, but I didn't know
Mm.
to the extent, honestly. And I didn't know also that you worked, with Michael for so long with This Is
Yeah.
Horror, and that you were friends, like, long
Before
before.
This Is Horror. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. We actually became friends because of metal. We actually met at like a
Yeah.
random party, because we were with like the same metal kind of crowd. And yeah, we ended up chatting about mostly about like music for about the first 3, 4 years that I knew him. And
Yeah.
then suddenly he just mentioned one day he was doing this thing with This Is Horror. I was like, dude, I love horror. What the hell?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's why I bring up metal. I brought it up to him too because
Yeah.
I've always been into metal, and, it's just, like, a big part of my life, right?
Yeah. Oh,
I
if you
could
like the black stuff and the death stuff, actually, I really recommend as well the new album by a band called In Vain,
Okay,
which
I
is
know
like
them, yeah.
two words, yeah. And it's called Solemn. It came out last week, and I've already played it about 10 times. It is just wonderful. It's like really, really hard, like sort of black and death, but
Yeah,
then with
yeah.
little bits of like saxophone and trumpet thrown in at different times.
Oh,
It's
that sounds awesome.
bonkers. It's brilliant, man.
It's like a almost like a jazz infused maybe,
Yeah,
death
totally,
metal.
totally.
Yeah, that sounds I love that type of thing, honestly,
Yeah.
like, when they introduce different especially jazz. I mean, rock deals with so much blues.
Mm.
It's really interesting when there's a jazz element to it because I love
Yeah.
jazz as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially live. I mean, live is just
Yeah, like
life changing. My God.
absolutely, yeah. So, I could talk about music all day,
We could.
but we're here to talk about, your books, and also wanna talk just a little bit about your life because, you've lived in different, European countries. So, I know the answer to this, but I wanted you to, give the answer, where have you lived, and where are you living right now?
Yeah, sure. So when I left the UK in 2011, it was like the summer, the beginning of summer, like May, I think. And it's funny because I had like this career as like a data analyst, which is very office based and very like, sitting in my corner, tapping away on a keyboard all day. And then I trained to be a teacher because I wanted to do something different. And basically, I just packed my life up and moved to Turkey. And I didn't really realize the significance of this until the day before I went to bed. And I just had this moment of like, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
This is
What's
insane.
going on here?
But I got to Turkey, and eventually, like, the guys did actually turn up, and there was really a place that I was going to, really a school. So I went there, and this was like in the south western part of Turkey, like in the coast. It's sort of quite near to like all the kind of touristic beach kind of areas.
Mhm.
So I lived there for about half a year, a bit less than half a year. Found out my job was illegal while I was there,
Oh,
which I
wow.
didn't know about, and I had checked everything. Like, I'd done my best due diligence to find out it wasn't. Um, from there, moved to Poland for like 3 years, and then after Poland for 3 years, I wanted to move somewhere with the euro currency, so I could travel a bit more because it was a bit more stable. Came to Portugal, met my now other half, and the rest is history. I've been here for 10 years near Lisbon.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
beautiful there. It's, like, pretty sunny, right?
Yeah, very sunny. Yeah, absolutely. It really helps with the sad a lot,
Yeah.
really.
I've thought about picking up and moving to the Bahamas or something, but maybe
Yeah.
maybe Portugal would be a good,
Have you visited?
No, but I have been, like, down to Florida and, um, is it humid there, where you are?
It's more humid here in winter, actually. So the winter is pretty tough. You have like an 8-week winter. It's
Yeah.
reasonably short for you guys, but like that winter is pretty rough because it's very humid and cold. Like not
Mhm.
not like minus. It's like sort of plus, uh, like 5 centigrade, something like that. But very humid, so you feel the cold a lot more. But then the rest of the year, it's not that humid and it's lovely.
Oh, I could deal with that then because
Yeah,
I can't stand humidity. We went to Florida once in the winter, and, it was beautiful because the sun's out, it's, like, right above your
yeah,
head. Everyone's, like, kinda bundled up a bit, but we're in our shorts and our T-shirts,
yeah.
and it
They
felt
don't
felt
know
kinda
what they're
humid and
doing.
hot to us, but it was a nice break from winter, let me tell you. I
Yeah, I
could
can
definitely
imagine.
go with dry. I thought about moving to, like, places like Arizona if I could because I think dry heat would be perfect.
Yeah, I love desert heat. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. So, in researching you, especially while reading your books, I was excited to learn that the inciting incident for Shadow of the Hidden actually happened to you, which is really cool.
yeah.
Um, can you explain and also tell us what the story is about?
Yeah, so basically, it's a gin story,
Hmm.
which I mean, that's like a sort of the original word that we get genie from,
Yeah, yeah,
but this is very much not Disney's Aladdin.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like a very bad gin, and so basically, what happens is there's a guy who's a British person who's living and working in Turkey, not in the kind of role that I did, something different, and then his Turkish friend basically refuses ice cream to an old woman, and she puts a gin curse on him. And the British guy naturally thinks like, yeah, whatever, gin curse. What are you talking about? But as the Turkish guy's preoccupations grow and things start to get weirder, they realise that there is in fact this curse there, and they have to try and find a way to break this curse. And it kind of goes all over, like North Africa, into places that are sort of what we call the Maghreb, which is like the bit of like sort of expanded like yeah, French Arabic kind of territories, and then across to Egypt as well.
Yeah, Cairo, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now, I really enjoyed that first scene. I was like, I have a bit of a phobia. If anyone put a curse on me, I would probably freak out because that's just like I don't know. I have a scientific sort of mind, but when it comes to things like that, you have that voice in your head that says, "What if? What if everything's going to go bad?" So that right there, you caught me because I'm like, I'm afraid of that.
I think fearing curses is quite sensible, though. To be fair, I mean, like you just never know, right? Like you
Yeah,
just never
you
know.
just don't know.
It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
when you grow up with like Ouija boards and that kind of thing. I always think like I always kind of shied away from that kind of thing. I'm a complete atheist, always have been, but
yeah,
like I just think why tempt fate? On the
yeah,
like
exactly.
0.001% chance that it's going to work out. I will do not want any part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, like I'd be, I'm sorry, here's your ice cream. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Please take off the curse.
but yeah, so it really happened, and she really did curse him, and the bit in the story actually where she changes from Turkish to Arabic, that actually really happened as well, and
Yeah.
I kind of felt incredibly uncomfortable because I didn't speak Arabic at all. I speak a little bit now, but I was just like, oh, hello, this is not nice. And then she spits on the ground next to the guy, and the guy who's like this massive ex-soldier, crying his face off, and I was just like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is not okay.
Yeah. It was interesting because I was listening to you on a podcast about 3 years ago, and,
Hmm.
you were talking about this book. So,
Yeah.
when did you have this book written?
Well, I was finishing it up about 3 years ago. So, I mean, the idea kind of this idea came about when this event happened in 2011,
Mhm.
and I kind of knew that like this was something I'd want to use, and so I asked the guy immediately, like, "Hey, do you mind if I use this experience?" This was after it transpired that he was not in fact cursed to damnation, um,
Yeah.
and he said, "Yeah, fine, just don't no names, but that's fine." So I had this kind of thing carrying around with me all the time, but I needed to know where the story would go, and a couple of things happened. One was that when I was thinking about writing it, because I got to the end of another couple of books that I'd had sort of ahead in the queue, um, as that happened, a podcast came out called The Hidden Djinn, which was done by a lady called Rabia Chowdhury, who's like a defense lawyer for wrongly convicted people of color in the US,
Okay.
but also a Pakistani American and very interested in jinn folklore. And so she did this podcast on called The Hidden Djinn, which is fascinating. And it was literally the moment where I was looking to write this book. So I was like, aha, serendipity.
Yeah.
So I listened to
Synchronicity
that.
too, yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I listened to all that and I kind of took all the notes of her sources and then got myself a few books and articles and things like this. And that kind of set me up for it. And then when I started writing the book, which was about 3 years ago when I was on that podcast, um, I got to the point where this character Deniz came in, who's like the expert on scripture and this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And the original intention with her was that she was going to be this character in this one scene. She was going to give us some advice. Maybe they'd like contact her by email. And then she kind of just showed up and said, "No, I'm coming on the adventure." And I went, "All right."
Excellent. Actually, I had a question, about that because I
Mm.
like how, you had, like, the know-it-all character, but nobody necessarily knew all the answers, and the characters, they have to travel all over the place. But if this was like a movie, they would have that person who works at the university who knows everything and can give them all the answers. I really enjoyed that aspect of it because I think sometimes movies take shortcuts, right? But the part of the plot of this story was that they had to travel in order to figure out what was going on. Then, when they finally did figure out what's going on, they needed to go fight it.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the idea as well that this was something, very old and very nasty. And one of the books I read when I was researching, actually, I think it's called The Vengeful Djinn. It's in the
Mm,
acknowledgements, I can't remember. But that was just fascinating about like just how unpleasant these things in folklore can be.
mhm.
Um, and how they kind of act almost without reason, just literally, it's kind of like having cats actually, like they do things just to be a dick. Um, and so the idea of like having someone who had all the answers didn't really fit, and I just thought it'd be more authentic to have some people who have kind of pieces of the puzzle but then need to kind of try and assemble those and get other pieces from other places.
Now, did you kind of develop the characteristics for this gen, or did you borrow from real folklore?
A bit of both. So I think it's important, like when you're using folklore, especially if it's not yours, because I'm very aware that this is like not my origin, even though I've spent a lot of time in the places that are kind of mentioned. Um, I think it's really important to kind of have a good grasp of like what it is first, and then if there are things you want to change for the sake of the story, then you can. For example, there's a thing to do with an animal. I won't say any more than that because of spoilers,
Hmm.
but that was like very much ingrained in the folklore.
Very cool.
Mm.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the characters because the scene is right out of like a real life circumstance.
Mm.
So I was wondering if do you approach creating characters in the same way? Do you take aspects from people that you know in order to create a character, or do they just kind of come fully formed as you're writing during the
That's a
process?
really good question, actually. I think it kind of differs, in fact, because I've got like a book that's kind of like um, half written, but it's one that I go back to now and then when I have a bit of free time, which is actually like sort of a darkly comic crime, like murder book.
Hmm.
And that's based on an office where I used to work. So many of the characters in there are like sort of major pastiches of people that I kind of have worked with previously. Whereas like my work in progress that I'm writing right now is about two people who I completely like invented from the ground up and are very different probably to more or less anyone that I know really. So yeah, it really depends on the case, I think.
Yeah. Excuse me. I was wondering about gins as well. Like, are they a big part of the folklore of is it Turkish folklore?
Yeah, so I mean, I think generally like they come about a lot in sort of any country that's got like an Islamic cultural background. So
Hmm.
like Turkey, but also in Egypt, all across like North Africa, the Arabic countries, like parts of India, Pakistan, places like that. So I think it's very much ingrained in the culture there, and it's very interesting actually. There was one reader who reviewed this book on Goodreads, and she liked it. Hooray! But she also said that when she started a job a few years ago, she was working with a bunch of people who were from. I think it was Pakistan, but I can't remember entirely. But she kind of once said to them, "Hey, what's up with these jinn then?" And they were like, "Whoa,
Don't. Yeah.
don't even talk about it." Like, and this is how seriously people take it. People say like, don't talk about them because you'll kind of invite them into your life and this kind of thing. So I don't know if I'm in like a
Maybe.
world of
I
trouble having
was just
written a
about to say
book about
maybe
it.
we should change the topic here.
Let's talk about fluffy ducks. That would be
Yes.
much
Or
safer
kittens.
ground.
Kittens, they can be dicks too, and we can talk about
True,
how
true.
they can curse your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to find out about that shortly.
Yeah. Because yeah, you did get some kittens today, didn't
I
you?
picked up 2 kittens today. Yeah, they're very cute.
Yeah.
One is called Shelley, after Mary Shelley. That's
Okay.
my kitten. And then my other half's cat is called Miss Marple because she's a major Agatha Christie
She likes
fan.
Agatha
So
Christie, yeah.
yeah, she'll be sleuthing around the house, I'm sure.
There's one aspect to one of your characters that I found kind of funny at first, but at the near the end, I was starting to feel really bad for him about it. But every time Seb got into a taxi, he would hold on for dear life. And at first, I thought it was just like a neat little character trait, but by the end, I realized that he's like absolutely terrified. Is this a trait that you have at all, or know anyone with?
I actually really love driving and really love cars, but I mean, actually, where I live in Portugal, so the driving standards here are probably the worst thing about living here. Like, people do drive like they genuinely want to kill everyone else at all times. But actually, in Turkey, it's very similar, and in places like in Tunisia as well, Egypt, like the driving like is proper like racetrack, but like destruction derby racetrack. It is truly terrifying. So that's more. It's not so much a reflection on him; it's more a reflection on like having been in those situations and like being in cars in those places. Like in Egypt, I had a taxi driver once, and we were going to a train station, and he like we were just driving around, and he said. And we were quite scared, me and the person I was traveling with, and he said, "In Egypt, we don't use brake, we use horn," and I was like, "Okay, nice, yeah, good. That's one strategy, I suppose."
Are there a lot of accidents?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, in Egypt, actually, the driving test when I travelled there some years ago, I was told by the same guy was that they would put 4 traffic cones about
Hmm.
5 meters apart, so like a massive square. You start your car, you drive into the middle of the cones, you stop. If you manage to not hit a cone, that's it. You're all done. Off you go.
Oh wow,
Yeah. So it's a wonder
interesting.
that the standards of driving are not very high.
Yeah. I just wonder here because like when you're driving in Canada and in the States, you always see those people who like on the highways who swerve between other cars, and you
Oh
just
my
know that
god.
one day they're going to be in a wreck.
Yeah. It's so
Which is
scary,
which
isn't it? It's just like,
it is, yeah.
why?
Especially the motorcyclists because they really
Yeah.
weave in between, and you always
No
hear about the
protection.
motorcyclists.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a shame. So Seb and Denise and Oz, they visit a lot of countries. How many countries do they visit in their quest here?
They start off in Turkey, then they go to Tunisia, and they go to a couple of different places there. Because Tunisia, interestingly, like even though it's not like I mean, culturally, when I was there, it didn't feel like one of the most devout countries that I've been to. Like there were elements of it, there were places that were more devout than others, but they actually have like the fourth most significant mosque in the whole of the Islamic world, basically, because it's
Hmm.
really old. It was built in like the 7th century or something like 695 AD or something crazy like that.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, so they go there to see a guy who's like very senior kind of religious authority. And then they go across to from there to Cairo, and then beyond that they go back to Turkey. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, at the end, they go to an interesting place. We don't need to go into any details, but I want to
Mm.
talk about the town a little bit. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm going to pronounce it right, but Kayakoi,
Yeah, Kayakoi, exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's one of Turkey's ghost towns. Does Turkey have
Yeah.
a lot of ghost towns? Because when I went to look, it seemed like there seems to be a few of them.
There are quite a lot, yeah, and it's basically I actually lived really near to Kayakoi when I was there, so I used to go there quite often for hikes and things, and it is a fascinating place because basically, at the end of the Ottoman Empire, which was like sort of end of World War One ish,
Hmm.
um, basically they had an agreement with the Greeks that that any Greek towns that were occupied by Greek-speaking, Greek living people, people who are practicing Greek Orthodox religion, for example, they would then do an exchange, and so those Greek people would return in inverted commas to their country, and Turks living in Greece would return to Turkey. But the thing that was strange about this was that many of those people were like second, third, fourth, even like fifth generation, so they'd never actually been to their country of origin, as the culture kind of put it.
Hmm.
And so these towns, like Kayakoi, is a really major example. People literally were just told, like, okay, you're going now, bye. And so if you go into the town, you can still see like the tables still have stuff on them. Obviously, it's been like like eaten away by pests and things. But
Yeah.
there's calendars up in the classrooms in the school. It is absolutely like really chilling just being there because you're in this place that's like literally people were here and then they weren't here anymore.
That was going to be my next question. Like, it must be kind of chilling to go through this town because I was looking at pictures. And, I'm fascinated by ghost towns, but all our ghost towns are pretty much taken over by the vegetation, and
Yes.
you can't even really see the buildings anymore
Ah, okay.
unless
Wow.
they're on like rocky plains or whatever. But we
Gosh.
don't really have any of that. So what's it like going through those streets? I mean, they look very well preserved.
Yeah, they are really well preserved. It's kind of a mountainous region, so you do get like some shrubs and things like this, and like weeds and the odd like pine tree cropping up here and there from seeds that have kind of flown over there. But I mean, yeah, the majority of it, like I say, is really well preserved. So you can, walk into a building, walk into a house, walk into the old church, walk into the old schoolhouse. I mean, a lot of it's structurally unsound, so you have to be a bit cautious as you're going about.
Hmm.
But yeah, you can just feel like you're walking in a town, which could still be populated even if badly maintained. It is a very chilling feeling. Yeah,
Yeah, and there's others too, like one that has like a half-built castle.
yeah.
I forget the name of that town. I don't.
I don't remember, but there's several. There's about 5 or 6 across the country, and there's a
Yeah.
few more on the islands of Greece, like sort of nearby, which had exactly the same thing happen, but the opposite. So Turkish people just sort of supplanted back to their country in inverted commas. Very
Yeah.
strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you do travel a lot,
Mm.
and one thing I really enjoyed listening to you talk about is how every time you go to a different place, you like to ask the people there what type of monsters they're afraid of, or
Yeah.
what monsters lurk in their forests.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what are the most interesting answers you've gotten that you haven't explored in a book yet?
Ooh, okay. Wow. Um, there are so many. I mean, actually, uh, there's stuff here even in Portugal that is really strange. We have like because Portugal was like one of the first countries that kind of did a lot of exploring in the Middle Ages. There was a time when Portuguese sailors were the first ones to go around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, for example. And when they got there, they found a monster in the ocean. I can't remember what the monster is called. My God. It's Adamastor. My
Mm.
missus just shouted it at me because she's Portuguese. She's going to be ashamed of me now for forgetting. But yes, this was like a monster that lives in the ocean and just comes out and kind of attacks sailors, for example. There was also a really interesting one. This is somewhere I didn't actually go, but I met people from uh, Estonia when I was in Poland because it's not very far around the Baltic Strait, and they believe in these things called haljas, which is basically like elves.
Uh-huh.
And I actually did write a little story about those, which was put in a podcast. It was a short story only, but like these little elves are like super friendly. Don't give you any hard time unless you overstep into their territory, and then like good night.
Knives out
Exactly.
and fangs.
Exactly that. Exactly that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had fun with that.
Interesting. Do you have any folklorish stories like what you just talked about that you're still thinking about writing into a novella or novel or short story?
Well, we have a um, there is a tradition here in Portugal in the it happens at Carnival actually, which is like the thing before Lent, basically.
Hmm.
But it used to just it happened for many years before the Christian kind of culture was imported here. And basically, what it is like because it's like sort of around the final days of sort of winter darkness. These people in the north of the country do a variety of different sort of rituals, and one of them is they wear these like crazy masks,
Hmm.
which they use to literally scare away the evil spirits that are coming across to off them.
Yeah.
Um, and I wrote a short story a while ago, which was in my collection actually, called The Solstice, which is about this tradition.
Hmm.
And I have recently extended that into a novella,
Oh, cool.
and that's going to go to the publisher, I hope, this summer actually. So hopefully, going to see that one next year.
Awesome. Is it like contracted? Like, is it going to come out or?
It's contracted, yeah.
Okay,
So
excellent.
as long as they don't hate it, fingers crossed.
They're like, yeah, yeah, we're gonna pass on this one. Do you have
Yeah.
another one? You're like,
Thanks,
no.
Kev. Go away. Go back to your mask place. Yeah.
If it, let's just say something like that did happen, would you like
Mm.
put it out yourself or try with another publisher?
I probably would, yeah, because I really like the story, and it's one of the short story in particular. Like it was one in my collection that lots of people who reviewed it actually wrote in the comments like I would really like to understand more about this because there's quite a lot of stuff. For example, like the main character in the story is a young boy, but the POV character is actually a father, and his young boy is the one that's going to defend the city against these dark spirits with a mask.
Hmm.
And the father is really intent on the boy doing it, despite the fact that he's the only boy there, and there's a good chance the dark spirits are going to kill him because there's only one of him. And so people were asking, like, why is the dad so like? Why doesn't the dad just run away? And so when I wrote the novella, I was like, why didn't the dad just run away? Let's explore that.
Yeah. So I'm also wondering, excuse me, when did you you seem to be like a lot of your writing is based on folklore
Mm.
and things that you've come across, interesting things like monsters in the mine and whatnot. We're gonna get to
Yeah.
that soon,
Okay.
but uh, I'm just wondering when did your interest in folklore develop? Were you reading a lot of fairy tales as a child, or did it's just something that became more so present when you were traveling?
That's a really good point, actually. I think I grew up just always loving these kinds of tales. I mean, my dad used to collect a magazine in the UK called The Unexplained,
Hmm.
and it was like real fodder for the imagination for a kid. Probably shouldn't have been reading it when I was like 8 years old.
Yeah.
But every week it would cover like these things cults worshipping demons on Wimbledon Common in London,
Cool.
UFO sightings, the stories of the Black Shuck. I don't know if you know the Black
Yeah.
Shuck.
That's
Yeah,
like a dog, right? Like a dog
yeah,
sort of creature. It's in Britain, if I'm
yeah.
not mistaken.
It's
Yeah.
in East Anglia in Britain, like sort of so like Norwich, Suffolk, that kind of
Yeah.
area. And one thing that's really interesting is there's a church which has like these massive claw marks in the
Oh,
church
nice.
door, and like that is supposed to be where the Black Shuck actually attacks, and he didn't get in.
Oh,
But
wow.
I've seen it. You do look at it and you do think like, I mean, I don't believe it's like a giant hell dog, but like I don't have a clue what it could have been.
I gotta look that up because like I
Yeah,
know about I don't know very much about it, but I've heard about it.
sure,
But I
you've
gotta
heard it.
see
Yeah,
that a picture of those claw marks.
yeah, definitely, definitely. It's really worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so I guess it kind of developed when you were a kid, but I guess the seed was planted at least then, and then
That's the thing. Yeah, and
yeah,
then I've always been interested in ghost stories, and I mean, I do like a lot of human horror as well.
yeah.
But like supernatural horror has always been kind of the thing that the stories of my heart, as it were. And actually, when I moved to Poland, when I started in Poland, it was much more difficult to survive without learning the language. And I found the easiest way to learn the language beyond the classes I was taking was to read. And obviously, reading like novels is quite difficult when you're a beginner. So I read children's stories,
Hmm.
and so children's stories were things like Baba Yaga, various incarnations thereof, this old woman called the Witch of Birds,
Hmm.
um, who was like basically like a witch who lived in the forest and just controlled the birds and just like killed people with them. This was like,
Interesting.
proper the old Grimm fairy tales, not the friendly Disney ones.
Yeah, I mean, that would make an interesting Disney movie.
Yeah, yes, I'd quite like to see that.
Yeah. You brought up Baba Yaga,
Mm,
and I know that that was your first novella. You
yeah,
based it off the Slavic folktale of
yeah,
Baba Yaga.
yeah, yeah.
I didn't get to read that book before
Mm.
talking to you. I wanted to, but I just ran out of time. But can you tell us exactly what the folklore of Baba Yaga is?
Yeah, so it's very interesting actually because like what I was surprised by, because I'd heard about her from video games, from the Hellboy comics, like, and those the things that I'd seen were based very much in like real Slavic folklore around her persona. But what I found when I started reading children's stories there was that there's actually a multiple interpretations. So, like for example, one story she might be completely evil and just trying to tempt a young maiden into her house to kill her and put her in a stew. But in other ones, and this is what I found fascinating, and this is what I chose for that book. Um, Basically, she was just a kind of like a go-between mankind and nature,
Hmm.
and she's like a steward almost, as it were. And so she's just like sort of trying to make sure that nature doesn't kill people, but also people don't kill nature. And as long as you don't step outside those rules, you're safe. But if you do, then woe betide you. Um, and so that was the kind of the approach that I took with her in that story. And yeah, evidently the people decide that her advice is not good, and they do cross the rules of nature, and bad things occur.
Yeah, and we should mention that the novella is called The Balance, and from my understanding, it was pretty popular. People really enjoyed it.
It did pretty well, yeah. Actually, there was a time when Mother Horror Sadie Hartman made a big thing about it on social media, which I'm eternally grateful for, and lots of people snapped it up on her recommendation. So it kind of got a bit of a following. So yeah, I was very lucky that that landed in the right place at the right time.
Excellent. Yeah, that that
Mm,
that would definitely help.
mm.
So before we move on to Below, which I did get to read before talking to you, I was wondering, other than folklore, how does traveling like you have done so influence your writing?
I think, like, I mean, I really do live to travel. Like, one of the hardest things actually during the pandemic period was just like being stuck in the same place for such a long time because it had never happened to me before, really. Well,
Yeah.
not since I was an adult, anyway. So I guess like a sense of place, like, is really big for me in writing. Like, I tend to focus a lot on locale, but also things like food as well, because I think food, and you must have noticed, I'm sure there's a lot of food in my
Yeah.
writing when they're in exotic places, and I feel like food for me like grounds a story in location as well in a lot of
Hmm.
ways.
Absolutely. I mean, you find that, and I find that's a big thing in fantasy novels.
Yeah,
The way that they like to ground their stories in a place, even though it's made completely made up, is by showing you all the types of food that they eat. I mean,
yeah.
George R. R. Martin was like
There you go.
huge. He'd go pages telling you what was on
Yeah,
the
about the
table for
banquets
dinner.
and things. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Now, uh, I would like to talk a little bit about Below.
sure.
Below, I believe you got the idea to write that when you were invited to go visit a mine. Was that in Poland?
Yeah, it was in Poland. Yeah, so I
Uh,
had a student. Yeah, and he was like a one-to-one student.
yeah.
Lovely, lovely guy. And like basically, he was. We did like regular grammar and vocabulary work, and then every few weeks he would say to me, "Oh, Kev, I've got a presentation to give to the board," because it was like a company that was like half Polish, half American, I think, in terms of investment, and they were digging coal mines basically, and other types of mines as well, but specifically coal in Poland because there's a lot of very rich coal seams,
Mhm.
and um, and he would say, I've got this presentation. Can you check it for me? And I'd give him some tips. Fine, fine, fine. And then after, like, towards the end of that first year working there in Poland, when we weren't going to be working together anymore because his year of study was over and his English had improved and so on, I hope. He kind of said to me, "Look, what are you doing next week?" And I was like, "What, on the holiday?" And he's like, "Yeah. Do you want to come to? Do you want to come to this mine and see the place that I've
Mhm.
been telling you about for the last 7 months or whatever?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, that'd be great." And so we got there and we went inside, and just completely fascinating. Not at all what I would have expected either, because it was a very, very deep mine, like 820 meters or something. So
Wow.
like half a mile, maybe. Yeah, like
Yeah.
long, long way down.
And an interesting fact about going into the mines is a lot of people would assume it's cold down there because if you
Oh no.
go like in basements, typically it's cold, right? Because you're
Yeah,
underground. So you just
exactly.
assume underground's cold.
Yeah,
But when you go deep down like that, there's a pressure and it
exactly.
makes things hotter.
It is sweaty and uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, like the first thing he did when I got there was he said, like, "Okay, you got to undress," and I was like, "This is not that kind of. It's not that kind of a
Yeah,
date,
I came to
Mika."
see the mine, not
Yeah, exactly, exactly. There's been a misunderstanding, and he was like, "No, no, no. It's just like if you wear your clothes with the overalls, like you will be like dead." And so I had to like just strip down to my boxers, put the overalls on, and then. But even then, even like just wearing like thin overalls with a hard hat, it was still really uncomfortably hot and close. You know, like sticky, kind of humid, horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, did you get the idea for Below when you were in that mine, or did it come after?
It came after because I didn't really start writing until like seriously until 2017. But like the experience of being down there at that depth, like really made a huge impression on me. So that was something that when I did start writing, it was always gonna be something I wanted to tap into. However, I could find a way to do it.
Did the idea come to you fully formed, or did you have to work at it? Because I don't want to give anything away, so I'm just going to say it may go in a direction that you're not expecting to anyone who's
Yeah.
unread it.
I mean, well, I had the idea because I was doing a thing called the Story a Week Challenge in 2017, and that's actually where the balance was about 50% written, and it's basically where you do a new story every week for a whole year, which is really hard work, and it was kind of where I was cutting my teeth as a writer to some extent.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the stories I wrote were bloody awful. And some of them I felt had promise. But then also during that time, when I was writing The Balance, for example, I wrote that over about 6 weeks. So I ended up only writing 39 stories. But at the beginning of each week, I would at least try and write down like a premise, like sort of like an elevator pitch to myself. And one of the ones was like about like because before I was a fiction writer, I was a travel blogger,
Mhm.
and I got to
Yeah.
know a lot of people who do like adventure travel because I mean that's not something that I do, but it was still interesting to me. And some of the sites they saw were just incredible. And what I found amazing about that was that almost all of the ones who were doing like really incredible stuff were young women. Um, you know, you might think that it's just some burly like action sort of hero type man, but in fact, most of them were, you know, just young women who are really fit as well, and you know, did lots of climbing, swimming, diving, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's where the character of Jess came from for that story. And I just thought, like, yeah, let's do something with that. And then some kind of family history, because if I'm not doing folklore, then I think family is a big theme I like to tap into as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a sort of folklore in a sense, right? Like it's a
Mm,
history, right?
exactly.
But I really like Jess's character because of that influencer. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that that's something you're starting to see in books now. You're seeing influencers come to terrible endings. I read a book earlier this year called This Wretched Valley.
Oh,
Uh,
who's that by? I'm going to write that down.
Gretchen, you know what?
Oh, yeah, I have seen that. It's got a really vivid cover, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's like got that
Jenny
face.
Kiefer. That's it.
Yeah, Jenny Kiefer, that's it. That has some I think that's packed full of, like, influencer oh, no, it's not packed full, there's a couple influencers in there, and they reach a
Mm.
bad end. But you get the feeling, like, with Jess, like, you're not necessarily supposed to like her because she's all about the TV show, and she's all about the numbers, right? And
Yeah.
so when the main character's going through some issues with certain things they find out while they're down there in the
Mm.
mines regarding his family, she's like, "Buck up,
Yeah.
we got a show to shoot."
Yeah. She just wants to get. I mean, I kind of have sympathy for her because, like, I do understand that, like, if you are at that influencer phase, you obviously have so much pressure to create. You know, content. And
Yeah,
she wants to get to a place where, like, she's got like a TV contract and you know, like guaranteed earnings and a production team behind her. So I kind of get it, but yeah, lack of sensitivity much.
yeah. Well, that's the interesting contrast with her is that she still had the sympathy, but she knew that she had to like, I liked her as a character because,
Mm,
you could see that she cared, but she
mm,
also had strong loyalty to everything that she's doing. She doesn't
yeah.
want it to get messed up, right?
Like a hard-nosed determination. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
like there. I'm sorry you're going through this, but you got to buck up.
Yeah. I need my contracts.
Yeah. Now, when you this was originally published by Silver Shamrock
It
Publishing,
was. Yeah, absolutely.
and Keelan Patrick Burke did an awesome job on the cover. I mean, everyone talks about the
Yeah.
cover, right? And it's absolutely beautiful. But I was wondering because after like some serious issues, Silver
Mm.
Shamrock went under,
Yeah.
and that was like pretty soon after your book was published, like less than a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, like
So
4
you
months
were
or 5 months or something. Yeah.
yeah, suddenly your book is homeless,
Mm.
and but you managed to keep it, but you also were able to keep the that awesome cover. So I'm wondering, first of all, what kind of panic does going through something like that summon? And secondly, I was just wondering, how are you able, because usually when a book when an author goes through that and they lose their book's home,
Mm.
they find a new home for it, but it comes with like a completely different cover. How are you able to
Yeah.
keep the Keelan Patrick Burke cover?
I mean, well, basically, it was very terror inducing when it happened because it's not just the fact of the book being unpublished, as it were, which is bad enough as it is because it was only my second book,
Yeah,
and it was. I mean, I felt like it came about 15 months after the balance, so I felt like this is kind of quite a good timetable. But then obviously we were also in the middle of COVID, which was it's had its own multitude of challenges, of course.
yeah,
And then when this book suddenly disappeared, I didn't have anything else on the radar in terms of publishing. It was just a really scary moment. Um,
yeah,
but also because of the thing that brought Silver Shamrock down being quite a controversial piece, you do wonder as well if you're going to be associated with that, if your
yeah,
brand, as it
yeah.
were, is going to be tarnished in some sense. That was quite terrifying. But I was really lucky. I'd recently landed a shapeshifter story in a book called Were Tales from Bridget's Press,
Hmm.
which was a whole book of shapeshifter stories, which some of them are fantastic. There's one with a warthog, I think it is. It's just unbelievable.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then uh, basically when it happened, they kind of approached me and said, like, would you be interested in us putting the book out again? And I was like, oh my God, yes. And so we had a first meeting, and in the first meeting, I remember like we had like a little sort of like a video chat on Discord or something,
Hmm.
and Heather, who is one half of the team that runs that are the managing editors of Bridget's Gate, she said about the cover, and I was like, "Is there any way we can keep it?" And she was like, "I'm so glad you said that."
Yeah.
And so she went to Silver Shamrock and went to Keelan, and Silver Shamrock said, "Look, we've discontinued the book. The rights are yours. You can have it." Keelan Patrick Burke actually said we could reuse the cover without any additional fee, but they wanted to have some differences to differentiate it. So they changed the font for the title and added that blue kind of smoke, which I think
Yeah.
enhances it, to be honest.
I noticed there were
And
some changes, and I thought
mm,
maybe that had something to do with it.
yeah. It was that just to sort of have it stand out from the original press.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
So I really enjoyed Below. I finished it just like yesterday. I kind of sped
Hurrah!
through it. It took me a while to get through Shadow of the Hidden because last weekend was when I started it, and I went to like a baseball game and all this other stuff. So it took me a little bit longer.
Sure,
But
sure.
I was really hoping to get to more of your fiction before talking to you, like The Balance or your short fiction
But thanks for reading
collection.
those too, man. I really appreciate it because I know like the TBR for all of us is like,
Yeah,
like
exactly. Yeah.
yawning over us, waiting to crush us to death.
Yeah, but I did get to listen to some of your short fiction 'cause some of them are
Mm.
on podcasts,
Yeah.
and, I enjoyed every single short story I listened to you on those
Awesome.
by you. Uh, the ones that I listened to appeared on podcasts like The Other Stories and Tales
Mm.
to Terrify. There was 2 on The Other Stories and 1 on Tales to, Terrify. Now, I'm asking this next question is a little bit, curious as a writer myself.
Mm.
Did you find it difficult to get your stories onto those podcasts? Because I haven't tried very often, but the times I have done, they've been rejected.
Okay. I think at the beginning I found it more difficult, but I think I tend to take a different approach when I'm writing a lot of the time for audio.
Mhm.
So, and when I started to take to consider like the audio format when during the process of writing, I think it made that It made being accepted easier. Like there's been a few times, for example, where I've submitted stories that have been published in print, and they've been knocked back.
Hmm.
And so now, for example, I just had a story accepted last week or the week before for the other stories, which had already been published in print, but I chopped the story down and I changed a few bits and I changed the kind of angle of attack, as it were, for the
Hmm.
narrative, because I wanted it to be more sort of audio focused. So yeah, I think that would be the best advice I could give, really, for someone who's looking to publish on audio. Just think about that medium.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like a short chunk, it's like 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when forming this question because I was like,
Mm,
okay, in Kev Harrison's stories, they weren't the longest. They were about 20 like the other stories, the two stories were Left Behind and Crawl
mm.
Space, and they
Okay,
were
yeah,
about 20 minutes each.
yeah.
Is that something you take into context? Like, do you read it out yourself to see how long it is before submitting, or
Well, they have on the other stories, they have a fairly strict word count. It's like from 1,800 to 2,300 words,
okay, yeah.
basically. So you got quite a sort of short window, because the idea for them is that they don't want to have an advert breaking up the story.
Mhm.
And with their host, they have to have adverts if they go over 25 minutes, basically. So for
Yeah.
them, it's like ideal to have that little package. And I think it works really well because they drop a new story every single Monday. And it's, when I'm going to work on Monday morning, it's always one of the first things queued up in my podcatcher. So
Yeah.
it's
It was
great.
your stories introduced me to the other stories. I'm gonna be
Mm.
listening to it. I absolutely love the production.
Yeah, the
Um,
production is incredible. And they
yeah.
just, I mean, they were really good when I landed my first story with them, which was like one called, what is it called? I can't remember now, but it's kind of a Hansel and Gretel butchery parody based in like modern UK.
Mhm.
And I thought they did an amazing job with that. But I mean, if I compare that production value to what they have now, it's night and day. I mean, they've come so far from then.
Yeah. I like that they put, like, a sort of ambient music, to the
Mm,
stories, to, both Left Behind and Crawl Space, that music along with the story sorta gave it, like, a Twilight Zone feel to it. I mean, it
absolutely.
made me think Twilight Zone specifically. I think it's maybe because of the content in your stories, but also, uh, just
The
the
whole
music,
vibe they
right?
create, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the narrating team as well is fantastic, like
Yeah.
really so good.
Did
But actually, they've got a submission call for heavy metal themed stories in
Oh,
July.
that's interesting, yeah.
So, I mean, I think you really have to throw your hat into the ring.
I gotta write that, yeah, heavy
If
metal.
you go to the other stories.net, on there, they have their full list of themes up until the end of this year, I think. So, yeah.
Awesome, I'll check that
They're
out for
great
sure.
people to work with as well. Like, such great people to work with, honestly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was wondering though, were you a fan of The Twilight Zone at all, especially those
Oh
older
my God.
episodes?
Yeah.
I
Growing up.
love
In
them, man.
fact, there's one episode that I think about probably weekly, even now. And I saw this when I was about 10. It's one where like this car, I can't remember what the title of it is. I should look it up. But it's where like someone's going in a car and they're going somewhere and they end up in this place where there's just fog everywhere.
Yeah,
And they keep driving and there's just more fog and they just never really get out of it. And I just found it so horrendous, like in the best way,
yeah.
when I was a kid, and that story really stayed with me. Um,
There's a yeah, I know exactly what you mean because I have a Twilight Zone, I forget the name of it, but it's the one where the Earth rotating around the sun loses its orbit, and in the first half of the Twilight Zone episode, it's moving towards the sun, but then you
mm,
realize that was just a dream. It's actually moving away from the sun.
oh my god,
So this this episode of Twilight Zone has given me repeated nightmares
oh my
over the
god,
years. I keep having dreams where the Earth loses its orbit around, which could happen.
yeah, of
It's
course,
an
yeah,
actual possibility. It loses
especially with
its
Planet
orbit
X
around
on
the
the
sun.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's being cast out into like deep space, right?
Oh
We're
my god,
out of the solar system. And I had one just this week. And
just horrendous, like an
these
idea. My god,
yeah, these dreams are vivid though. I keep like in these dreams we all know we're gonna die, right? Everyone on the planet knows it's the end, but we're just waiting for us to basically freeze to death,
right,
uh, or lose the atmosphere or whatever, right? And
sure.
in these dreams, I always look up at the sky, and there's always a period where you see like Jupiter go by or something like
Oh my god,
Saturn, and it's just terrifying. Like it's
yeah,
so
that
vivid,
is
but I don't know that I'm dreaming in these dreams, and they're
wow.
so realistic. It's fascinating, but like when I wake up, I love thinking about that dream. But while
Yeah.
I'm in it, it's like the most
Get me
horrifying
out of
thing in the
here.
world. Yeah.
My God, yeah. I think it was just so brilliant for that, wasn't it? Like that and the Outer Limits, just like the way they could just be playful with an idea and just go like, "This is mad, but let's just do it anyway."
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's one short story here is from episode number 449 of Tales to Terrify. It's a precious query.
Mm,
This is like a space. Speaking of space, this is a science fiction horror, space horror.
yeah.
Now, I love the idea of what this story blew me away absolutely
Mm,
because, well, first I love space horror, but
okay.
I love the idea of finding things in space that maybe you shouldn't find, like these
Yeah.
characters find.
Yeah.
And I also love learning about space, so I know a fair amount about space. I'm by no means an astrophysicist,
Sure.
but I do know like little things where a story will make it believable or not. So, are you a fan of space as well?
Yeah, in fact, I had a when I was like I think 9 years old, my birthday present was a telescope, and I just like went from there. I mean, like we're really lucky in Portugal. Actually, we have a lot of places, well, a few places that are called dark sky zones where they're not allowed to have artificial lights after dark.
Hmm.
And so we've been to a few of the one of these places at least, and they normally employ like astronomers to go there, and they you can look up in a telescope. We saw Jupiter's moons like through a telescope, like really close up. Well, not as much as you can.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
couple of years ago, and it was just amazing. So I love all things to do with space. Actually, I recently watched as well this series on Apple TV Plus called Constellation. I don't know if you saw it, but if you like space horror, that was just wonderful.
Constellation. Where do you find that?
It's on Apple TV Plus.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check
It's
that out.
so good, my God, and it's like really like lots of existential and like sense of self philosophy stuff going on as well. It's real mind bender. It's brilliant.
Oh, very cool. I love that
Yeah,
stuff, man, like,
yeah.
so much. So I was wondering what was the genesis behind writing this story? And I ask this because of the whole space, like, I wasn't expecting a space horror story, but I got
Okay.
one, and I was so excited.
Yeah, I mean, I actually read at the time when I wrote the story that there's this asteroid called Psyche, which is in the Kuiper Belt, I believe. Um, and they had identified that, like, through spectral analysis or whatever, that it was very heavy in like iron and other like precious metals. I think some other precious metals that are even more valuable, maybe titanium or something. I can't remember exactly. And I thought, like, yeah, I mean, go and mine it, but like, do you really want to go and mine it? Like, what will happen?
Yeah.
And funnily enough, actually, about 2 weeks ago, there was an experimental spacecraft actually sent to Psyche to do a little baby drilling. And I actually
Mhm.
thought of this story then. I was like, oh, so nice. They're going to do that. I hope they don't find what they found in my story.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. I mean, I like how they find what they find, and they send it back with,
Mm,
like, the computer tells them what it is, basically. I don't wanna
yeah,
give it away in case anyone
sure,
goes and
sure.
checks it out, but they're like,
Mm,
"Yeah, this is what it's saying, but we can't tell what everything else says, so let's send
mm.
it back, see what they say, if we should preserve it instead of, continuing on." But, of course, they're like, "Oh, it's just a bunch of scratches, there's nothing, just continue on." And I would be
Exactly.
like, "No, man, what are you doing? There's something here." Oh my god, like, but yeah, I was just wondering because there is a lack of space horror, I find.
Yeah.
I think there should be more of it, and that
Mm.
was a pretty original idea. Do you have any plans to write more space horror?
Well, I would love to because I like I say, it always fascinates me. Like, I mean, I was a big fan of Event Horizon growing up and that kind of stuff, and also,
Yeah.
some of the earlier things like Day of the Triffids and War of the
Mhm.
Worlds, that kind of stuff. Um, and just recently, a writer, I don't know if you know V. Castro. She's like a
Mm.
Mexican American writer but lives in the
Yep.
UK. She wrote this sort of novelization of the life of one of the characters from Aliens
Yeah.
that was really well received. And she basically then has recently started to say, I want to edit an anthology of stories set in the Event Horizon universe.
Ooh,
And let
nice.
me tell you, if someone greenlights that, I will be going away to my writing cave and trying to put something together, most definitely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I love VCat. I haven't read too much from her, but I follow her, and, I wanna read it's, oh, what's the name of the book? It's named after the character. Uh from Aliens, but I can't remember the
Yeah, Vasquez. That's it, Vasquez.
Vasquez, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I
It was
need
it
to
was
read
like
that book.
back here. Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah. I
need
need
to
to
read
read it
that.
as well.
Yeah,
I've read some of her folkloric stuff, which was amazing. Like
I wanna
really,
read
really.
all her stuff
Yeah.
because what I have read has been, like, brilliant, right?
Same. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, all right, so that's pretty much, what I got.
Okay.
Before we go, though, I was just wondering if you have any upcoming releases, short stories or whatever, or novellas that, you can talk about?
So I do have a short story coming out on the other stories, but that's going to be like in a couple of months' time. It's called Elixir, and it's for
Excellent.
their fame theme. So it's about a famous person or a wannabe famous person. I won't say more than that. I also have a book that's with my publisher at the moment for editing, which is going to come out hopefully before the end of this year. It's a folkloric sort of. It's almost like dark urban fantasy as much as horror. It's like it's got some horror elements certainly, but it's like it involves the Fae in Western France. It's a place I went to a couple of years ago to investigate like this place, which is fascinating. And that's called the Siren of Armorique. But that's going to be a few months away as well. Yeah, I haven't got any dates for it, but yeah, man, I just want to say like thanks so much for chatting with
Oh,
me.
yeah.
Thanks so much for
But
reading the books
I
as well.
I'm not completely done yet.
Okay,
One final question that I'm
yeah,
starting to ask all everyone who comes on the show is gonna get asked
okay.
this question, so long as I remember. My memory is awful. But
Same here.
but
Age.
I do have it here. It's in my list of questions, but I put it after upcoming releases. I don't know why I did that.
Hmm,
But, last question. What author do you think is underrated and more people need to talk about? Because everyone
okay.
has, I think, an idea of where to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I could go for several here. Honestly, I really could. But I'm going to say T.C. Parker. Do you know her?
Yep,
Yeah.
I am
See
familiar.
her stuff. I mean, like I read her first horror novel, a novel called Salt Blood, which
Mhm.
was sort of a techno dystopian folkloric horror in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. And it like just completely blew my mind. Like just the writing, the characterization of the people in it, and the whole kind of setup was just so believable and so horrific. And I really, really loved it. And then since then, I've read everything she's put out horror wise. And some of the books are like mad. Like one of them is called A Press of Feathers, which like involves like an ancient god being reborn in Leicester, of all places in England, and like birds that are murdering people and all kinds of stuff like this. But still, I mean, everything she writes is just absolutely gold, and like the quality of her prose is just like I feel like I go to school every time I read her stuff, as well as love it.
Awesome.
So yeah, I really feel like she should be read by everyone.
I, uh, I remember when Salt Blood came out,
Mm.
everyone on BookTube was talking about it,
Mhm.
and, I saw her talk about it on BookTube as well.
Yeah.
In fact, I think you may have been there once or
When
twice.
she was talking with Ross Jeffrey,
Yeah,
maybe.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
sure,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so I bought that book right away.
Mm.
I was like, "I gotta read this book," and I went and bought it, and, of course, I haven't read it yet, but
Yeah.
it's definitely on my,
It's on the
TBR.
shelf. There we go.
I am going to move it up now, and
Yeah,
next
check it
time I
out.
have some free reading time, I'm going to, maybe dig into that and check that out.
I mean, she put a mosaic novel out in 2022 called Hummingbird, and like it's basically
Yes.
four novellas that kind of tie into each other,
Oh,
and like it's kind of gory as hell and like queer as hell and just completely fascinating. But when it comes together in the last story, I was just like, chef's kiss. This is
chef's
just
kiss,
like
yes.
gold.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
find that, collecting like, Stephen King seemed to have started this. I don't know if it
Mm.
happened before him, but there seems to be this, like, Josh Malerman's doing it now,
Yeah. The Goblin. I haven't read it yet.
Ronald
I've got that,
Malfi,
but
but
yeah.
they're collecting novellas now, like, it's usually 4
All
or 5.
intertwined and kind of
Yeah,
working together. Yeah. I
I
love
love
this
that
idea.
idea.
I
Yeah,
wish I
me
was
too.
smart enough to make it work.
Well, you should give it a go. I think if you
Yeah.
just focused on it,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be that bad. You
It'll be a
should
lovely
definitely
project
you could
to
make it
work on.
a space horror,
Oh my
huh?
god. I would just love it. I would love it.
Maybe
Yeah.
involving a planet or something or a moon
Mm. That would be
or a
extremely cool.
spaceship.
Yeah. Or the
Alright,
Earth
so we're
slowly drifting away from the sun. No.
Yeah, see, your mind is already working on it. So there you go. Maybe I planted a seed. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, sure. So like I've got a website which is kevharrisonfiction.com. And if you go there, you can actually get a supernatural witchcrafty novelette for free if you sign up for my
Oh, yeah,
newsletter.
cool.
And I send like a newsletter once a month. It's not like it's not like filling your inbox or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And then on Twitter, if you search for Kev Harrison, I'm actually listed as Lisboeta English, which I didn't think about at the time. Uh, but yeah, if you just search for Kev Harrison, you'll find me there. And I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, on just everywhere. If you look me up, I'm generally quite friendly.
All right, generally?
Yeah, generally after coffee.
After, yeah, not before coffee.
Exactly.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming on,
Man,
and
thanks so much.
I wanna thank everyone who's, tuned in to listen,
Yeah.
and, you're invited to come back on again anytime you have something to promote, just,
Oh, that's amazing. Thanks, man.
yeah, I'll have you on again. All right.
Really
Thanks so
appreciate it.
much.
Cool. Thanks a lot.